take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Welcome to Life in Red.
Okay, now the mic is on.
Sweet.
We just had a long, extensive chat before the mic, and I think you're really going to enjoy. And Khazzam here, welcome.
Oh my gosh, hello.
Is this your first podcast?
Yes.
And it's a cool
And-
experience, eh?
Yeah, I'm kind of scared.
No, so that's why we're gonna talk it out.
Okay, great.
So you came to me from your sister,
Yeah.
who, fun fact, is my most listened to episode of the podcast.
Okay, go Emma.
Yeah, so she can gloat about that. It's still the highest downloaded and listened to. So
Might have to beat her on that one.
yeah, we'll see. Do you have a good friend list that gets behind all your projects?
I mean, I'd say so. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good. I'm gonna be big with the kids, as they say, and then I'm gonna sound like an old man now, which terrifies me. Your sister and myself, we talked about you, and your name came up because we were talking about her being Jewish, and we were talking a little bit about the Holocaust and anti-Semitism and all that, and that because your family is Jewish, and she said you'd be a really good person to talk to.
Thank you. Thank you.
So
Emma.
I don't know if you guys fight at home, but
Not at all.
she thinks the world of you, I guess. So we're gonna here to talk about when your sister and I were talking. A big thing for me and what I found fascinating about the world that we live in is that there's a rise of different voices now through social media, and we're making space for Indigenous people and people of color and LGBTQ. And one of my points is that there is a lot of anti-Semitism and hate crimes against Jewish people that kind of get passed over a lot of the time. Mm-hmm. And I asked her if anti-Semitism was on the rise, and she said, yeah.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
It is more than fair to say. And it's so frightening. And I don't understand how that's possible and how that's an actual statistic, because for what all the Jewish people have gone through since the dawn of our existence,
Mm-hmm.
and especially after the largest mass genocide in world history, which was the Holocaust that happened about 70 years ago, it boggles me to think about how anti-Semitism can still exist after everything that we've gone through.
Yeah, I went to do a little bit of research before this, just to kind of get some facts right and make sure. And I knew you were coming in a short order of time. Mm-hmm. And I pulled up a page to try to see, just get an overview of, all the kind of stats and the big events that have happened throughout our history that involved kind of mass killings of Jewish people. And the list was, way too long.
Never
I was
stopped.
like, oh, my God.
Yeah.
For me, that puts things in perspective. Mm-hmm. Now, we'll get to a little bit more of what's going on in today, but I wanted to start off because you're in terms of life experience, you're quite young. Mm-hmm. But you're quite involved with, Holocaust history and information and as you described it, education. Yeah. How did you kind of fall into that? Especially at a young age, that is a heavy subject.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. So when I was in grade 10, and now I'm in grade 12, so this was around April 2018, I had the privilege on going on a trip called the March of the Living. And it is a trip with 15,000 teenage Jews from all around the world. Any country that you can think of, some people from there were there. Mm-hmm. And there were about 20 people from Ottawa, and we were part of the delegation of Coast to Coast. So that was all the provinces and territories in Canada except for Toronto and Montreal. And Coast to Coast group was about, I think, 60 people. And yeah, oh my gosh, what was I saying? Sorry.
So you're on the March of the
Yes.
Living with a bunch of people from
Yes.
Canada
Yeah,
and Jews from
sorry.
around the world.
Right. Okay. So basically, the March of the Living is a 2-week trip in Poland and in Israel. So the first week is spent in Poland when we're visiting different different concentration camps and work camps, including Auschwitz-Birkenau, which you may have heard of, and it's the largest concentration camp in the Holocaust, and they killed the most Jews and most people. And yeah, just like hearing about it, it sounded really big and really scary, but actually going there was life-changing, because I didn't realize, I don't know, like you hear all these facts and it's hard to really interpret them as truth until you see it, and just seeing it in person, like even right now I feel like my heart is racing.
I can
and I'm
feel
just getting
the emotion
red.
about it, like coming from your voice and your face. You're a little nervous talking about it, and I think that's a huge thing that you just brought up was, 6 million Jews died, and to a lot of people we hear that a lot in history class and documentaries, and in your mind you're like, yeah, it's a big number, but when you put that number into perspective, 6 million, that's the entire city of Toronto 2 or 3 times over, wiped out systematically.
And I'd say it's just like it was the theme that was really brought up a lot just during, like, for the March of the Living, was putting that number 6 million into perspective. And there were times where that number really hit certain people. So for me, that time was when we were in Auschwitz. So that's the work camp of Auschwitz-Birkenau. So they're 2 separate camps about 2 kilometers apart. And in Auschwitz, all these like work camp buildings, so these factory buildings, have been turned into museums, but like not the typical museums. So basically, one of the buildings you go into, and there's like no writing on the walls or anything. You just walk into a room, and the first room that I walked into, it had like a purplish light coming through the door, and I was like, oh, what's this going to be? And I had no explanation going in. It's just everyone was very quiet. So I go in, and I look to my left, and it's a very big room, and I see a mountain, and I'm like, what is this? And it was a mountain of brown human hair. And I saw it, and I shrieked, and I just started crying, and I feel the tears coming now, because seeing that, and like seeing this hair that looks so much like mine, I understood how many people, and this was just from Auschwitz, and it just put the number into so much perspective. And I couldn't like help it anymore. I just felt like I couldn't be in my body, because I don't know what to say.
That's okay.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. That, I think for anybody listening right now, that this seems to some that aren't affected a long time ago, myself included, but to someone your age to be so profoundly affected by it. Take a minute. Are you good?
Yeah.
Okay, it's okay. It's okay.
Okay, thank you.
I like the only words I can describe is that, like, just hearing you and the emotion that just goes into it, and we've only like going back to the anti-Semitism part, that like this is a real thing, and this has a real effects on a lot of people. I know someone their grandfather was not Jewish, but lived in Poland at the time of the invasion, and hearing stories of how they were relocated to Africa, and hearing the stories that, growing up on a reserve in the middle of Kenya and seeing giraffes outside the window, just because we only see it on a documentary and on a film or a recreation in a movie, that I think it has lost some of the realism.
100%.
And that's why I think it's important, and that's why I wanted to have you on, to bring again back the human part of this story. Because like you said, I remember there was a documentary. I should have researched it before I turned on the mic, but it was about, it was film from the actual liberation, but they banned the documentary. I think it was by Alfred Hitchcock, but they banned that documentary because they were used, like all the footage that they used, all real, that they deemed it was going to be too much for the public to handle. So they put it away, and it just got released, I want to say in 2013, 2012. And that, like, again, that just puts into perspective, because you saw pictures of, you know, these rooms filled with teeth or gold.
No, not pictures. You saw the actual gold from the teeth.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and like the actual hair.
Yeah,
and
like that was all that. Yeah, right. It was. Sorry, yeah. The movie was actually like showing the footage.
I see.
Was the footage of them for the first time going into these rooms and filming and seeing it.
Yeah.
And that, like, they deemed that, like, that was too much.
Yeah. No, I can't. I can't handle the concept of it being considered too much for people, because I understand that it's a really heavy topic, but it's one that everyone has to know about, because as we're seeing, if we don't learn about it, then that means that we forget about it. And when we forget it, that means that there's no lesson learned. And someone's bound to repeat the same mistakes again. And they are getting repeated, proven by the rise of anti-Semitism. And just the whole thing about the rise of anti-Semitism, like, before I used to think that, oh, like, that can't really be true. But then I started hearing stories about it. And then I started, like, encountering it in my actual life. And these are just two small instances, but they literally happened in the past week. Where, say, like, I go to a very Jewish school. It's a public school, but I'd say about 25% of the people are Jewish. And I was just working in my math class, and I looked down at my desk, and there's just a swastika engraved. And it was just shocking. And I felt so touched, because it's like, okay, how can someone be so disrespectful to do that? And then, so I told the teacher and whatever, they got it cleaned up. But then yesterday, I was just on Instagram, I was going through people's stories, and there's this girl who I went to high school with when I was in grade 9. She's in grade 12, and she had on her story screenshots of someone who had direct messaged her and was just going off she didn't say anything, but he was just going off, giving her these racial slurs and calling her all sorts of names that are derogatory towards Jews, and these pictures. And I was just looking through these, and I almost wanted to cry, because I just don't understand how it can be so normal, and how someone can take the time out of their lives to just do something like that to someone, and how normalized it is now. And I just, yeah.
No, I feel you, and the biggest thing to me is, like, how people think it's funny to put a swastika somewhere. Like, that's a pretty common thing that people are doing, and I don't know where the humor comes from. You know, I don't really much understand anything of bullying or being racist or anything like that, but that one seems to be a little bit more normalized. Like, people don't understand the impact of what that symbol meant or means to so many people. Yeah,
and I think a really big reason behind that is they don't understand the impact it has, and it's just like an easy symbol to draw. So they do it to, like, create a reaction out of people, and it's because they don't understand how it can affect people. And the reason they can't understand that is because they don't learn it, and that's scary to me, as in what I mentioned before, how we really need to there needs to be more Holocaust education, because without that Holocaust education, you're just going to have more people not knowing about the Holocaust and, like, drawing these swastikas because they don't know what it means. And that's why, to me, Holocaust education is so important. And I left this March of the Living Trip. Have I talked about it?
We were talking about it.
Yeah. So that's why I left this March of the Living Trip with feeling like I had such a task to perform in my community of teaching people about Holocaust education so that we can stop these the rise of anti-Semitism.
So, we kind of left off while you were on that trip. So you went and you saw the hair.
Yeah.
What was the conversation around you and other participants? Because you all were probably seeing the same things, but also, I imagine, taking it in not only as a group, but most of you were probably taking it in individually. Excuse me. Being introspective with the experience and thinking to yourselves and applying meaning to your own lives. What was the conversation around? Was there a lot of talking? Was there discussion? Oh, did you see this? Or was it a very kind of quiet?
So, I think it's just, I find that it's like, after visiting the different sites, you go and then you like get back on the bus, and it's hard to like talk about your emotions to the people next to you so soon because you're still digesting everything. So what became easier was just going on to another subject, and we had these two guys in our bus who had guitars, and they just used to play music, and then we would kind of get distracted by it, but like we wouldn't forget about it because in the evening we'd have a debrief, and that's when we used to talk and really share what we felt during the day. And I think the most common theme in the debrief was the utter shock after every day in Poland as to how Jews could have been treated like that, and what thoughts were going through the Nazis' minds when they were, killing so many people.
I asked you before we turned the mic on why they called it the March of the Living, and you mentioned that there was the march.
Right. So it's called the March of the Living because during the Holocaust, there was this thing called the Death March, where they would march all the groups of people from Auschwitz, which was the work camp, to Birkenau, which is they're 2 kilometers away from each other, and they would take all the workers, and then they'd walk them over to Auschwitz, where they would be gassed, so they'd be put into gas chambers, and then after they would turn the gas on. After a few minutes, everyone would be dead. And then these people called the Sonderkommando, which were other Jews who like had to work for the camp. So it was just another method of torture because the Nazis couldn't handle it emotionally. So they would empty out all the Jews and then burn them, and then move on to like the next batch. I'd say. And anyways, so yeah, it was like a common thing. So the March of the Living, it was a march, the same march, but instead of the goal being death, it was the goal being to celebrate life and to reflect on how lucky we are. And and it was with 15,000, from what I said before, 15,000 Jews from all around the world. So it was a very touching experience. And I had the privilege to do it with my brother. Who is currently 19, so we got to hold hands during the whole walk, and I'll never forget it.
You mentioned that there were survivors on this march with you, or as did you have a chance to talk to them? What were some of the? I know when they give speeches, you get a sense of what it was like for them, but I've never had the chance to talk to them one-on-one. What were some of the things that they said? What were maybe some lessons, some things they wanted you all to take away from it on a more personal level?
So, okay. So we had 2 Holocaust survivors with our coast-to-coast trip, so for about 60 people, so like 1 on each bus. And one of them who became kind of like a grandma to me during the trip, she was definitely an inspirational figure to me. Her name's Angela Orots, and she is one of the only babies born in Auschwitz, and she is still living, and she is such an incredible human being and so joyful and good-hearted. And yeah, anyways, so I talked with her all the time, and her main message was, no matter what happens to you, no matter what you go through in life, that the most important thing is to always be a nice person. Always be kind to others and treat others the way you'd like to be treated. And that really stuck with me. And I think it's just the most important lesson to learn from the Holocaust is to be kind.
Mm-hmm. Do any of them like remember their time there? Because I guess most of them who survived this long, probably children, young people. Like, did they describe to you about what their time was like there or anything like that?
Yeah. So I'm friends with another Holocaust survivor called David Moskovich. And
that name sounds really familiar.
Yeah, he's from Ottawa. And he's a really cool guy. Anyways, so I had the opportunity to have many long talks with him about his story and his experiences in concentration camps and growing up in Nazi... Oh, where did he grow up? Somewhere in Europe. I forget where. I'm sorry, David. I forget where. And his story is such a real one and such a sad one to hear. So he grew up in a small town, and then he was sent to a concentration camp and it was a work camp as well. So he had to work there, and he was with his dad and his uncle, and his dad became really sick, and he also became very sick, and he was very starving. And the most memorable point of the story was when he told me how one day he was just so starving and sick, and he was just walking, and he saw on the ground his uncle just dead, and it didn't even register emotionally into his heart, because it was just, he told me that he wasn't human anymore when he was in that camp, because they had turned him into an animal, because they gave him no human rights. And when I say no human rights, I mean the food that they gave consisted of what they said was like a potato salad, which is basically just dirty water with rotten shaved potato peels and like grass and stones and whatever they put. It was just like dirty water basically. And that was all the food that they got for the day. And then in terms of appearance, they were given like these uniforms, but that had gone through like different victims before. So say they had like bullet shots, like holes in where the heart was, as in, and you could understand that like the person who had the uniform last, that's how they died. And like they shaved their heads, and they just they treated them like animals, and they wanted the people in the camps to feel like animals. And that was just all part of the torture and the mind game that they played with Jews during the Holocaust. So I think I've heard like a lot of stories said where the survivors where the people in the concentration camps would rather have just died than survived. And that's why I find it so inspirational for just Holocaust survivors, even more inspirational that they can go through that, come back, and still be here today, sharing their story, and having like a positive outlook on life.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't understand how that's possible, but somehow I've met so many, and that's what they do, and it just really demonstrates how strong humans can be.
Mm-hmm.
And it's
Absolutely.
admirable.
One of the biggest, and I don't know if you have the answer to this, but I see on Twitter or the internet when sometimes you have people who are, one, either very uneducated on the subject, or two, they're deniers. They say, well, there were so many more people in the concentration camps than there were guards. Why didn't they just take over? Has there ever been like talk or any of them talk about that, or in any of your kind of experiences, was that ever like a question that was kind of answered firsthand from people who were there? Do you know?
Well, definitely when I hear from Holocaust survivors, like their thoughts on Holocaust denial, it's more like they don't really know what to say to it, because it's like, what is there to say? Like, how can I convince you more than like telling my story? You know,
Right.
How can you deny that my history happened to me? You know, these are the kind of questions that they think, and I don't really understand the whole concept of denying the Holocaust. Like, how can you deny that this piece of history happened? And you hear all these stories from all these different people. Like, it's impossible that they all invented it. And why were they not able to fight back? Well, first of all, they did fight back. There's an incident called the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. So basically, in different parts of Europe, like, the Holocaust hit in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
So in Warsaw, and lots of other different like cities around Europe, they, like, when Hitler got into power, they started having like these small laws. It was like a very small step-by-step process, where they would just like, okay, well, for example, the starting laws were like, oh, Jews were not allowed to go to the movie theaters, or not allowed to go to the grocery store between like this and this time. And then it started eventually becoming, Jews can't go to the movies. I mean, Jews can't go to the grocery store, and can't go to school, and can't walk on the streets, and have to be at home. And then after all those laws happened, then the Jews were just like forced in their homes. And then at one point they said, okay, now we're going to move all the Jews to the ghetto. So then a lot of people were actually really happy, because they were like, oh, great, this is going to be a new change in lifestyle. Maybe it'll be for the better. So they were allowed to bring like a small suitcase. So then they were all like rushed to move to these ghettos, so the Warsaw Ghetto. And then they spent at maximum a few months living there, and then they would be shipped in these cattle cars, so cars that used to be for cows, and they would fit like 100 people in one cattle car, which is insane. So it basically means like you are not able to sit down because there's no room for you to sit down. And on this cattle car you would go, it would take you like maximum 4 days to go to the concentration camp. So just like a little backtrack, the people in these ghettos, the ghetto living conditions were so terrible that a lot of people would look forward to going to the camps, because the Nazis advertised them as these fun camps where you get paid, and you get food, and you get shelter, and you get to like be with your community and friends and family. And a lot of people who like didn't have the money to go to camp before but heard about it were actually excited to go to these concentration camps. So they would go in, and if you can imagine like spending 4 days in a cattle car with no breaks, so that means no food, no water, but even more importantly, I'd say nowhere to go to the bathroom.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people, and then basically it's like one person gets sick and throws up, and it's a chain reaction. So then at the end of the like 4 days, it would be like flooded basically with feces and sickness, and it would be really gross. So those who survived the cattle car ride would arrive at the camp. And in Auschwitz, what happened was there were, the people would get off the trains. This is Auschwitz, this is Birkenau, so like the killing center of Auschwitz. They'd get off the train, and they'd go into a line, and primarily this doctor called Dr. Mengele would look at them and deem them either safe to work or not fit to work. So those who were non-fit to work he would like point them in a direction, and they would go straight to the disinfection center, where was a nice name for where they would strip you of all your clothes, tell you that you were going to showers so that you would become clean, and then they would shave your head. So this would not shave your head, like cut all your hair off, and then they would send you to what they said were showers, where you'd go into a room, and there were the gas chambers that I mentioned before, where they would have like these fake shower heads on the ceilings, which I saw, which are like so scary. Fake shower heads so that people would still think that they're going to get a shower, and then out would come like poisonous gas, which was called Zyklone B. It's like a blue gas, and then it would, in a matter of minutes, would kill everyone in the room, and yeah. So then that was one way if you were deemed unfit to work. And then the other way was where you were deemed fit to work. So by then you're probably separated from your whole family. And then you're sent to okay, so this might be getting confusing for people because, okay, so basically there's two camps, Auschwitz-Birkenau. The place where people are gassed is Birkenau. And the people who were fit to work would get sent to Auschwitz. Mm-hmm. Which is like where I saw the museum and everything. And then it would only be a matter of time before they were sent back to Birkenau to get gassed. And this is what I'm explaining here is only how it happened in Auschwitz. But there were many, many more concentration camps, and they all had their different ways of dealing with people.
That was my next question, because Auschwitz is the big one that kind of gets the rap, and I think kind of gets, I guess, the face of the Holocaust. But that's an important point you make, that there were many others. How do you know off the top of your head how many in total?
Yeah, so what was complicated about that is like there were a few big ones, like major ones,
right,
and then there were a few smaller ones that kind of got like forgotten about and like are so destroyed that like if you go there, there's nothing to see because like the Nazis completely like destroyed the sites. But there is I can't like remember like the order of like largeness of them, but I know another one that really struck home for me was going to Majdanek, which is another concentration camp. It's spelled Majdanek, so it's like Majdanek, but it's called Majdanek. And what was really scary there is that everything was so intact that they said that after 2 days of like fixing things, so this is like 75 years after the liberation of Auschwitz, it's like this year, so we're talking like a while ago, but in 2 days they can get Majdanek working to its biggest like capacity, like fully functioning. So that was like what was so scary about visiting there. And then another thing was like, in Majdanek, if you like walk up a hill, you see like a memorial site, which is enormous, and it's like a huge mountain of gray dust. So you go up to it, and you think it just looks like an enormous dust pile. But then they tell you that it's all human ashes from Majdanek. So only from one concentration camp. And then they tell you that every handful of ashes is worth one human life. So if you look up a picture of this Majdanek ash mountain, maybe you could look that up. And then you imagine that every handful of ashes that you collect is one human life, and then you see this mountain. It's really another good way of putting the 6 million into perspective. Right,
just as one camp. It is. It's there's not a lot to say about it, and when you get to kind of at a loss for words, but when people deny it. Like I can see like your face change from kind of emotion to like a little bit of anger, frustration, because that's on the rise too, unfortunately. With the rise of the internet, we hear a lot of good voices, but we hear a lot of bad voices too. And it would seem that I wish I remembered the study, and I do this a lot, where I mention things without any of the backup. But it was like what I thought was like an absurd amount of people in Europe who don't believe that it actually happened.
I just don't understand
Yeah.
that, because they are where the Holocaust happened, and they're around so many people who are alive during that time, and it angers me. Like, I feel like yelling. I just like you saying that, and this is like something that I knew, but just like it's just so triggering in my body. I just feel the need to. Oh, I don't know. Just yell, because I don't understand. I don't understand how so many people can deny it, because just like, if you live in Europe, go to Poland and see these sites, and then you won't deny it anymore.
So, 75 years since the liberation this year, you said?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So what's your experience with people, around your age, here at home? Because young people get a lot of bad rap for, one, not being informed and not caring, so that I think a lot of people would perceive that people maybe don't understand Judaism or even learn about the Holocaust or pay attention when that part of history class is on. What is, like, do you find you have to educate a lot of the people around you about not about all the harder facts, but just that, like, it happened? Like, is there a lot of people who know? Would you say that it's fading?
So, like, I can't really say if it's fading or not, because I'd say, like, I might be too young for that.
Yeah.
But another thing I'd like to say is that I have the privilege of going to a school that has so many people who are Jewish in it, which means that when we talk about this kind of thing, people are really open to listening. And it means that I can't really say if young people don't really care, because all of the experience that I've had with young people learning about the Holocaust is them caring so much, and it's nice to see. But then it's also like, looking at the statistics, I think 62% of millennials don't know, like Canadian millennials don't know that 6 million Jews died in the Holocaust. And then it's like, just comparing those two, it's like, I think I've just had the good experience of being in contact with so many people who care. Right.
That is a staggering 62%. Like, again, speech. I'm supposed to talk on a podcast. I'm just sitting here contemplating that number.
Yeah.
That, you hear in one part of the news with the election coming up, we're the largest voting bloc and that we can change the world. But then more than half of us don't even know that 6 million people died. To me, that, that is like less than 1% of the things you should know about what happened. We could, all that, and then, going after when they were relocated to Israel and all that, like, being displaced, and there's just so much to it in the Jewish faith and the history that your family and so many others went through. It just, again, I'm coming at this as a completely objective third party, and I'm just I'm blown away by it.
And I think, like, something important to think about is that it's like, you hear 62% of, like, millennials don't know, and then it's easy to say, oh, it's because, like, they don't care, or maybe it's like their fault that they don't know. But, like, how can it be their fault if they learn everything by going to school? That means that, like, it's a school that's not teaching them these facts, and maybe we need to, like, revise the history the history curriculum. Like, I know in my grade 10 history class we spent maybe like a day on the Holocaust, and it was not touching at all. This is before I went on the March of the Living, and it's like, it kind of went in and then went out. Like, I didn't feel anything. And then after going on the March of the Living, I was like, wow, how can we have only spent one period on the Holocaust when there's so much more to talk about? And Canada, there's a lot, like, Canada was so involved in it. Well, no, there was so little. They had barely any involvement in it.
Well, we didn't take anybody, right?
Yeah. In fact, our little catchphrase was, none is too many. Which,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we often see ourselves as heroes in ways in World War II, and a lot of times we were, but a lot of the times we weren't.
Yep.
We had internment camps for Japanese people and, turning away Jews. Have you been to Amsterdam and visited
No.
Anne Frank's house?
No, but I think my sister has.
So I went there, and I don't have the history with it, like someone like you would.
Mm-hmm.
But going through there, and I tried to place myself as a member of that family hiding, and the terror that must have been felt. I think about the times I was most scared in my life, and I look back and stupid things like I have an irrational fear of werewolves, and I was like outside and I heard it was probably a coyote, but I was like, oh my gosh, it's a werewolf, and I was terrified. That is probably not even like, I don't even know the percentage of what they must have been going through. So I think of myself like that, and then try to imagine that amplified.
That's really interesting
for
when
these
I think about it.
people who are trying to hide for their lives.
Yeah.
And for me, that was a very touching and moving experience.
Yeah.
But like that didn't have some of the.
Yeah.
Do you think it's important that they have those artifacts there, specifically in Auschwitz, where the hair, the gold, all that's the dust pile? Like, is that?
Oh my God,
do you think that's very important?
I think it's so important because it gives everything like a human quality to it, and it's kind of like proof. Even though everything else is also proof, it's just like, wow, that's the hair of a real person. And there was also like these displays of shoes where it was a larger room, and like instead of only one mountain, it was like two on both sides of the room. There's just like shoes everywhere. And then in my Donic, also just I don't understand, like I don't know how I can like explain it with words, like the sheer amount of shoes that were there. And it's like you think of every pair of shoes and that's one person, and it's just like such a good way of putting it into perspective. So definitely yes. And it's like every time I saw one of these displays, I couldn't help but like cry.
Yeah. In that documentary I referred to earlier, it had footage of when I can't remember which concentration camp it was, but when it was liberated, they basically kind of rolled out those rooms kind of like a shopping thing, and people who were being liberated because they had nothing would go into these rooms and kind of like get new clothes or get the clothes that were from there, and then like move it out, like take some for the road and to wherever they were going.
You need to watch this documentary.
Yeah, I should really find the name. I'm gonna try to look at it.
Okay.
Right now.
Yeah. Also, it's funny about you talking about Anne Frank. I've read the book twice, and it's cool because like reading that book has really been another way to put the Holocaust into perspective, because Anne is a girl who I'd say is pretty similar to me. She always, at the start of the book, she talks about how her teachers always complain about her talking too much, which is what I hear from all of my teachers throughout all of my life. And she kind of looks like me too. And we have the same hair and same name.
So you can maybe see yourself.
Yeah. So it was
a
just
lot like that.
interesting, just like reading those, like the book twice, and just seeing myself in a lot of like the dialogue and her thoughts, and it was really interesting.
So it's called Night Will Fall.
Okay.
It was I believe it's on Netflix.
Ooh.
That's where I saw it. I don't know if it still is. It's from 2014. So it's a film that they found, and they realized that it was footage shot by Alfred Hitchcock, who's one of the biggest movie people at the day.
I know what I'm going to be watching when I get home.
I always have felt a need to watch every Holocaust documentary as I can.
Yes. Have you watched Schindler's List?
I haven't watched that movie yet. I tried watching it, and I didn't get through it. That's one of like the classic Hollywood ones, though.
I think it it really,
like, it does a good job.
it does an amazing job.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'll give it
it's
another
like,
try.
they don't who was it that directed it again?
Steven Spielberg, wasn't it?
Yeah, Steven Spielberg. He was just not scared to lay all the facts out and show like what it was really like, and that was something that I really respected and really stood out to me for the film.
I just find a sense like I need to know and what happened, as uncomfortable as it is. Putting those things we talked about into perspective, that like, yeah, it might be uncomfortable for me to watch, but like think about what these people went through.
Yes.
Like, so when I saw this one, and I've watched a lot of them, like this one was like the most intense thing I've ever watched, probably. Like my hand was on my mouth the whole time, just in utter shock. And I'm like not even there. So again, it's been on my list. I've always wanted to go there and take it in firsthand, and that's on the bucket list. But it's it's something. Yeah. Like, because there's not really narration to it. It's like literally just footage put together. It's
just like your thoughts.
So like it starts at the Liberation when they're walking through and people are at the gates, like watching them, and the fences coming in, and how skinny and the.
It's not even skinny. It's just, it's like,
with the bones.
It's more, it's bone plus skin.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Like, and it showed, when they liberated, they made a lot of the SS, soldiers that were there have to clean up all the bodies. As like, they made the Jews do that, but then they turned it around and made the Germans do that after. And there was only a couple of them, and they had to do it all under like gunpoint.
Yeah.
And again, like this documentary, it's a lot, but like we've been talking about this whole time, how important it is to examine it.
Yeah. I think it's really important for more people to think like you. Just the thought that you need to know.
I think a lot about this in particular. I can do a lot more thinking on a lot of other subjects as well that are very important to the human story, but there's something that has always captivated me about this particular story. And I just find it so like sad isn't the it's not enough of a word.
I don't find like I took writer's craft last year for a whole semester, and a lot of what I wrote was Holocaust themed, and I think that was one of the most difficult things, was just finding words to describe how I felt about it. You just can't.
Yeah,
like, it's indescribable.
Exactly. Like,
it's not sad. It's
more
tragic. It's not tragic.
Again. Yeah. Yeah. No, I feel you on that. Yeah. What are some of the things that you want people, like when you're giving a speech? What are some of the like? Are there certain things you want people to take away, like some main points that you talk about, or you just kind of like just go through the history timeline, or do you put more of like a personal interpretation on it?
Well, okay, so basically, when I came back from the March of the Living, I came back home from the airport, and I unpacked all my things, and I was just like in this terrible mood, because I was like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to tell everyone about what I learned. So I went outside, and I took my computer out, and then I started writing. And this is like my first creative piece I've ever written, and I think it's my best one. And it's a story written in second person narrative, so like you, about a person, whoever you choose it to be, going through the Holocaust from start to end. So they grew up in Warsaw, and it was like, so the story is based. Anyways, this story is how I like to present the Holocaust to people. So it's basically, in my idea, like the person that I choose is like me. So a girl growing up in Warsaw, and she's had a nice life so far, and she's like at school, and she's like well liked, and then she's starting to get like a little bit of like racial discrimination. She doesn't really understand why, and then one day like her teacher asks like, who in this class is Jewish, like if you are, like raise your hand, and then she's like so proudly like raises her hand, because like being Jewish is kind of cool, And then she's asked to like be sent out. And then the next day comes around, and then she goes to school, and then her teacher says that, what are you doing here? Who are you? You're not part of my class. And she's like, what? I've been going to school here forever. Like, what do you mean I'm not part of your class? She's like, I don't know who you are. Like, leave. And she did that. And the teacher did that with like the rest of the Jews in the class. So then this girl leaves being like confused. And then these things start to happen where she like starts not being able to go to the movies, go outside, and a bit like what I explained before. So then she gets sent to the ghetto, and then the concentration camp. She's separated from her family. Then she's like selected to work, and then her family is gassed, and then she's like working, and then she gets sick, and then she ends up being gassed as well. And so that story, it's like a 10-page story, and it takes me about like 45 minutes or something or maybe like half an hour to say. But I find like even every time like I read it, I just get all the emotions come running back to me from when I was there. And I think it's like a really good way of teaching people and like making them connect with it emotionally. So yeah, that's like basically how I like to teach it, and I think it like really works. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't think there's any shame or anything. Not that I'm saying you feel it, but that you show emotion when you talk about this stuff. It's not like you're just some person just kind of rhyming off the facts, you know? Like anyone can do that, but to hear it from your perspective and how it emotionally affects you, I think that's huge. I think that's everything. That you can feel so strongly to this, that you're willing to get up there despite, you know, the feelings that you know you're going to feel, just to share it with other people.
Yeah. Thank you. I don't know others.
We're talking about how anti-Semitism is on the rise. Do you have like any numbers? I don't mean to put you on the spot with that without any...
Well,
because I've read some articles about it, and I hear a lot of people talking about it. They get a lot of... Like I said, it just struck me that no one seems to care when things really happen to Jewish people. There's never that mass outrage or panic. It just kind of seems like it gets passed over a little bit. At least that's what I find in the media, in the news, with people. And now you start getting a little bit from the other side where, well, people are you're white, so you all like, you know, like it doesn't matter, type thing. And that struck me.
Yeah. It strikes me too all the time. But in terms of statistics, the Azrieli Foundation, which is like a foundation from Ottawa, they have found from a like mass survey that 22% of millennials from like ages 13 to 34 haven't heard of or not sure if they've heard of the Holocaust. So it's like 1 in 5 people. And then that nearly 1/4 of all Canadians believe that much less than 6 million Jews were killed. So like 2 million or fewer during the Holocaust. And like another quarter were unsure about how many were killed. And then another really frightening one is that 6 out of 10 Canadians say that fewer people care about the Holocaust than they used to. So
that's that was the question I was trying to get at with, do you find it fading away a little bit?
So I think that like I can't really answer that because I don't know, but these statistics prove it. And yeah.
What can people do?
They can watch these documentaries, and they can listen to podcasts like these, and they can...
Do you have any... Sorry to interrupt. Do you have like... Are there any podcasts or YouTube channels or any... Like, is there someone or people out there who are kind of working on this in terms of getting the word out in not traditional media?
Yes. So there's a foundation called CHESS, which is the Carleton Center. Wait, what's it called? I looked it before. Carleton Center for Holocaust Education Scholarship.
Okay.
Where they did this project of filming interviews with Holocaust survivors from around Canada, where they like told their stories, and they're all on their website. So if you look on like chess.com or something like Chess Carleton, and you can find all these videos of people. So I've watched like a lot of them, and they're really powerful. But if you want to learn more about it, like look up any keywords online on YouTube on anything, and so many results will pop up, and they're like these really, really well done videos, because it's like a worldwide problem, like the lack of Holocaust education that a lot of people are trying to solve. So if you try like looking things up online, then you'll find things. But I know at my school there's like Holocaust survivors who come to speak to us, so that's a good way of learning. History class, but I don't find history class, like in my experience, was that influential.
I think as you're being brought up, being educated is one thing, but once you're out of the school system, I feel that's where it might get left behind. A lot of people get in the frame that once you're out of school, you kind of stop learning, and I'm not saying that's what it is, but I'm just thinking out loud, just wondering if... So, have you ever heard of Hardcore History by Dan Carlin?
No.
Okay, so it's a podcast. Now, he's an old radio guy. He's a master orator. Like, this dude goes on. So what they do is they'll put together a little series of podcasts. And they're long. They're like 3 or 4 hours a piece. And they're like 3, 4, 5 episodes at that length, going into a particular subject about history. So there's one called Countdown to Armageddon, and that's the lead-in to World War I and all the things that happen. There's one about Genghis Khan. There's one about the rise of Japan before World War II. So what I'm wondering, putting together something like that about the Holocaust, I
think that'd be great.
Yeah, you should do that.
I should do it.
But like going into, I mean, they do their heavy research. There are scholars. There's historians working on that project. It's a big project. But what I would love to see is using, what you want to tell people and putting it into a way that, these millennials who don't seem to want to research anything.
Is like easily accessible.
Yeah, and digestible for them. There's nothing about the Holocaust that makes it easily digestible.
No, I get what you're saying.
But anyway, that's a thought to ponder out loud as you go through it, using the people and the connections. Just that's, that would be really fascinating for people to know about.
Yeah. I wish I had an answer, like a way, like a solution.
Well, I just kind of want, again, it gets put into this lumped history pile that some people, because maybe it's boring or the education system failed them, that they don't refer to it. That if there's just, people like you who are obviously have a lot of passion and knowledge and things for the subject, some way to try to redefine the game in terms of the education. I was wondering, there's a rise of YouTube stars or influencers, I guess, I don't know. That's just me pondering out loud like I usually do.
Well, I'd like to ponder it.
There you go. Take it home, think about it.
I'll get back to you.
One thing that struck me is you're young, and that this is a subject that a lot of historians won't even take on. Why do you feel why is it you do you think that you need to tackle this subject?
I feel like, I don't know. I think I'm a very people person, and that's something that I've always attributed to myself, is just I understand people, and I like connecting with people. And after going on this Holocaust, like the March of the Living, this trip, it was all about how these people were so oppressed, and it was all like about emotion, you know. And to me, this subject has like just human emotion is always, I don't know how to word this, something that I think I've always like understood easily, and to feel it so deeply during this trip. I don't know if I'm explaining this.
It's called like emotional intelligence, is what I'm kind of picking up. It's someone who kind of can read situations really well, read what people are emoting. What if you can sense their sadness, you can sense there's things like that you just people with a high degree of emotional intelligence easily relate to people because they get what they're feeling or try to understand.
Always tell me I have, but so I think it's that really like took it all to made the whole like Holocaust story so meaningful to me, and because it's like such a powerful like event that it made me feel like I had to share it with everyone. So I think because it's not just like these facts, it's like stories of real people, of millions and millions of people that most people today don't know about, and it's like I just felt the task of having to share it with everyone. Is
this something that, now that you're getting ready to go off into your adult life, is this something you're pursuing more from an educational standpoint in terms of, history or anything like that? Or are you going to continue it and kind of branch off into a different career?
Yeah, I think I'm definitely going to branch off into a different career, but like always be open to opportunities where I can teach about it. But to be honest, I don't really know what I'd like to go study in university. But
it's a whole separate podcast. Let me tell you.
But yeah, no, good question.
I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot here, just as a way out. There's, a lot of young people who have made significant impacts in this world, whether you look at Anne Frank, like we were discussing, we look at Greta Thunberg, more for the climate change. We look at the Parkland students in Florida who stood up after the shooting for gun reform. What is your message to the older generation that seems to maybe discredit young people and their passions and their knowledge? Who might hear this and, she's a young girl, she doesn't know what she's talking about, or, you know what I mean? They just kind of brush you off. You have so much life experience to learn. Do you have anything like that? Because I truly believe that the younger generation, for lack of a better phrase, isn't going to take shit. And what I mean by that is they're not going to stand for, oppressive legislation in government, or politicians who don't do anything, or lobby groups that control the interest of humans, or money and government. They're not going to. I feel young people aren't standing for the system right now. Yeah. That's obviously failing us. So young people, I think, have a bright future. You're kind of leading that charge in a certain aspect of it. Do you have anything to say to people who might not listen or discredit you as a young person?
Well, all older people have once been my age. And I think it's important to put that into perspective, and also to say that I have a lot to say. And if you don't think I have a lot to say, well, then come talk to me and I'll tell you what I've got to say. And we are, okay, I think that's it.
That's a good one. Come talk to you. Like I said, you're doing a big thing that I think a lot of even older people don't have the courage for.
Thank you.
So you should be very proud of yourself and all the things that you're doing. And I hope people listen to this and then go do more research on their own, and maybe someone starts that podcast. I don't know, but
I'll start it with them.
it's a incredibly, again, important subject, and I'm at least going to do my part that it doesn't get swept under the rug by some people in the rise of anti-Semitism.
Thank you for that.
And thank you for coming on. And I mean, we went for an hour. This could be going through all the details, could take a really long time. So we only really brushed some of the surface of it. But I appreciate you coming on, and I know it wasn't easy for you, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Ryan.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye.